being here. It's a pleasure being with all of you. And I gotta say, I really enjoy Westerners a lot. There's so many interesting people here with so many interesting stories and so many interesting histories. And as program chairman, I would like to say that, I have wanted Westerners to be proactive in its subject matter. I wanted Westerners to have topics that are interesting to people, not only in the past, but today, more importantly today, because the subject of history changes. The interest in history changes. And sometimes history itself is viewed differently than it was in the past. And we have to look at all aspects of it. And one of the things that I have wanted to see is I wanted to see different subjects that are interesting today. And Black history has been a big subject. It's been an important subject. It has not been treated effectively. And I have wanted to have speakers on this subject, as well as some of the other subjects that we've had. And so tonight we have a wonderful opportunity here, a person who is doing their doctorate, who is Laura Voisin George, and I have been excited to hear this topic because it is about a Black man in Antebellum, Los Angeles. That to me, that subject matter should be a monumental interest today. When you consider time of slavery, a Black man in California, this has got to be a subject of great interest. And so that is why I'm so happy to introduce our speaker for tonight, Laura Voisin George. Please help me to welcome her.
Yes, I am Laura Voisin George. I am a PhD candidate in history at UCSB, and I'm also an architectural historian. My research focuses on 19th century Southern California, and my primary field at UCSB is borderlands. So in this presentation, I situate Robert Owens in a borderland setting in the Deep South and on the Overland Trail, and I examine his experiences guided by his decisions and his strategies in Los Angeles. Although primary sources are scarce, I use them to discuss the ways Robert Owens not only provided for his family, but also defined and defended the legitimacy of the Black community in Los Angeles in the 1850s and 1860s. In this context, we will see how his legacy contributed to the foundation of the city's growing Black community as it pursued social and investment opportunities unavailable in most of the United States in the post-Reconstruction Jim Crow era through the turn of the 20th century. I'd also like to thank Claudine Michel and Douglas Henry Daniels, whose summer research accelerator grant allowed me to go to the National Archives on this research. I'd like to thank Gary Cowles, late Gary Cowles, whose research on Robert Owens, particularly his real estate research, he shared with me before he passed. I'd like to thank the late Hal Eden, who introduced me to the Westerners a few years ago. So a general survey of y'all before I start. So after receiving the flyer for this month's, or before you receive the flyer for this month's presentation, who knew, show of hands please, there is a Black community in Los Angeles in the 1850s? Good. Who, had previously heard of Biddy Mason? Good. Peter Biggs? Okay. Who knew that in addition to the federal fugitive slave law that was part of the Compromise of 1850, that California passed its own fugitive slave law in 1852? Excellent. Who knew that there was an 1851 California law prohibiting Black, Chinese, and Native American persons to testify against white persons that became known as the testimony law? This is great, because I'll be talking about all of these. At least I know what I need to go into and what I don't. Thank you very much. They're also important in the story of Robert Owens. When I speak of Peter Biggs, many of you will know that he had a common nickname in Los Angeles that was a racial slur, but I don't say it. I will say near, and I hope you will understand the word that I am not saying when I say near. Are you good with that? All right. Huh? So there's a silhouette in this image because there are no known photos of Robert Owens. The men that you see in my photos are his grandsons, which are Henry and Robert Curry Owens. So what we know about Robert Owens is we know when he was born, or we think we do, about 1806 in South Carolina. We know he was brought to his family to LA about 1853. He played a significant role in 1855 in interrupting a slaveholder's plan to remove Biddy Mason and 13 other enslaved persons from the nominally free state of California to the slave state of Texas. And we know he died in Stockton in 1865. Not that much more. In a brief summary of Los Angeles' Black community in a promotional publication for the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, Robert Owens was one of the few members of the Black community who was named, along with Peter Biggs and 5 who had served, possibly while enslaved, in the US-Mexico War. It described Owens as he was a shrewd man of business, energetic and honorable in his dealings, made money by government contracts and general trade, and he was well esteemed by white and colored. There's also a brief anecdotal biographical statement about Robert Owens written by his grandson, Robert Curry Owens, in 1930, when the younger Owens was 71, that I will refer to. So as you can see, Robert Owens' name appears in some of the ads, but only in one census that was taken in LA in 1860. So in piecing together what may have been his path to Los Angeles, this is the only one that, let's see, this is the one I use because it's the only one in that he was live when it was recorded. So it was either Robert Owens or his wife Winnie who provided the information to the census taker. And their birth dates are likely to be accurate. And also you'll note in the census, perhaps if you can see it, that next to his name, no, I'm gonna use this one. Just I don't wanna mess up he's right here. And if you can read it, that's an M, meaning he was considered mulatto, or he told the census taker that his race was mulatto. While Winnie is shown as black, and that will matter in a minute. It's also unknown who wrote Winnie's obituary here, and how accurate is the information that it contains. Actually, there's 2 obituaries for Winnie. One of them's in the LA Times, and the other one's in Los Angeles Herald, and they have different information. They talk about how Robert Owens obtained his freedom and the amounts that were paid for each family member's freedom. This one is from the LA Times, and it states that he earned his freedom in Arkansas. And then the one in the Herald mentions that the family came to Los Angeles from Texas. One route that Robert Owens' slaveholders might have taken from South Carolina was the Natchez Trace, which we'll get to in a second because I just turned 2 pages at the same time. Sorry. Sorry about that. All right, so when Robert Owens arrived in California in 1850, he was a veteran of the borderlands of the Deep South, where land-hungry Euro-American migrants made claims on the agriculture and hunting grounds of recently removed native peoples. The details of his own removal from his birthplace in South Carolina have not survived, but the birth dates and the locations of his children's births in later censuses provide a map of his migration to Mississippi in 1832, to Arkansas in 1842 for one of his daughter's births, and 1845 for the other. This migration followed the pattern of expanding cotton production in the U.S. South in this period. Through the 1810s, South Carolina had produced more than 1/2 of the nation's cotton, but by the conclusion of the War of 1812, Southern settlers and their enslaved workers surged into the Mississippi River watershed, and the enslaved population in the region west of the Appalachians doubled between 1810 and 1820. By 1834, the new southwestern states of Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana grew by more than half the vastly increased U.S. cotton crop. This increasing demand for the land for cotton production also fueled demands for additional Indian removal. Following an 1830 treaty ceding almost all of the remaining land in Mississippi, the Choctaw people were removed to Indian Territory, which was later this western half of what's now in this picture, the Arkansas Territory. So one route that Robert Owens' slaveholders might have taken from South Carolina was the Natchez Trace, which you might be able to see in red here, which would take them from Tennessee into the heart of Mississippi. And then while they were in Tennessee, they may have bought Winnie there. The 1832 birth in Mississippi of Robert Owens' son, and the 1842 and 1845 births of his daughters in Arkansas suggest that Owens witnessed firsthand some aspects of this removal and remaking in a region that was a crossroads of different races and ethnic groups. Onto this not blank slate, arriving white settlers projected their real and imagined memories of earlier homes, claiming a racial and cultural prerogative for their possession and development of the land. Here Owens saw contingent spaces with few established rules on which to ground the expectations of the future. For anyone counting, that's Borderlands number 1. No record has been located indicating how and when Robert Owens achieved his freedom, how he was separated from his family. Winnie Owens' obituary states that he became free in Arkansas by purchasing his freedom. Another possibility was that if he was mulatto, he may have been the son of a member of a white slaveholding family and could have been given his freedom at the death of that slaveholder and the sale of the estate. But in either case, his options for keeping his family together were constrained in Arkansas because enslaved persons were not permitted to hire their own time. And it would have been extremely difficult for a slave to earn enough money to purchase his own freedom through irregular opportunities such as working on traditional days off like Christmas, for which they might have been paid 50 cents a day. This also begs the question of how he would have been able to earn or save the $1,100 that's mentioned as the price of his freedom in both obituaries. Owens' continued residence in Arkansas, if he was freed, was also a challenge because there's an 1843 law that prohibited the entrance of free Negroes into the state and required free black persons already there to get a bond of $500. And if Owens was considered a resident of Mississippi while being in Arkansas, being hired out in Arkansas, his options were no more promising. Under Mississippi law, he would have to purchase his own freedom or be manumitted by a will or some other document and appear before the county's court to receive a certificate to confirm that condition. But under an 1822 law, the state legislature had to approve or reject all slave emancipations in the state, and not surprisingly, those emancipations declined sharply in the following years. And further, if Robert Owens had attained his freedom in Arkansas, but his family was sold and relocated to Texas, he couldn't follow them, because Texas law prohibited free Negroes from entering the state without the consent of its Congress. Additionally, an 1840 act concerning free people of color in Texas provided for the sale into slavery of any free person of color who migrated to Texas. So information about how Robert Owens was able to overcome all of these financial and legal obstacles has not been located, but clearly he did, for he brought his family to Los Angeles in 1853. So sometime between his youngest daughter's birth in 1845 and his arrival in Los Angeles in 1853, Robert Owens had to come up with a lot of money, like $2,500 to $3,000. Gosh, how would you do that? Let's just say it was, 1849, and Robert Owens had heard of the numerous examples of enslaved men agreeing to accompany their slaveholders to California gold fields and provide them with services in exchange for their freedom, sometimes by working for them in the daytime, doing placer mining, and in the evening, doing things like laundry for other miners, or selling specialty food items that they'd made, like donuts, and using the proceeds from these to obtain their freedom. And whether it was an arrangement like this that he traveled to the gold country while still enslaved himself, or if he made an agreement with someone else, perhaps a member of the white slaveholding family, to accompany them in order to gain the money that he needed. Owens was negotiating for more than the time and the labor he was demanded of him. He also brought his skill set, including the abilities he had acquired to size up the situation and the persons involved, their character and behavior, and to make decisions appropriate to borderland situations. In Robert Owens' grandson's biography, it states that he crossed the country by ox team in 1850. I suggest that this date and the 1853 date of his family's arrival to Los Angeles are not mutually exclusive and not a typo. Owens could have traveled to California's gold fields to earn the money to buy his family's freedom, and then brought them to Los Angeles. So in doing so, Robert Owens entered another borderland, the mobile community of a wagon train composed of strangers, whose lives depended on mutual support and willingness. During the usually 6 months of overland travel, Owens would have also honed his skills in evaluating the other men in the company. Although a black person's initial position was usually that of a servant, laborer, or slave, they were engaged in every aspect of the company's work, often in situations requiring skill, reliability, and trust. Necessity challenged social norms, as the prohibitions in many southern states against blacks owning or carrying firearms because black members of the company needed a gun to take their turn in the nightly watch duties, guarding the company's livestock, and when hunting for its food. Yet other forms of discrimination were likely to have persisted among the slaveholders in the group, and a black company member's ability to recognize these traits and determine the best options to diffuse resentment may have been just as critical for survival. If Owens witnessed such behavior during his journey, it contributed to his understanding of the forms of prejudice seen as acceptable in different situations, and of effective strategies against them. It may have been while working as a teamster or a driver for such a company that Owens honed the skills in evaluating horses and cattle on which he would later build a business in Los Angeles. For those who are counting, borderland number 2. So this is a view of Los Angeles sketched in the year before the gold rush, and it shows how small the pueblo was then. What's going to be particularly interesting when you see the later ones is there's like nothing here. And we don't really have the part of the where the Calle de los Negros opened up. So here's the plaza. I think this is the one-story Lugo adobe before they added the second story in 1855. This is El Palacio. That's Bell's Block. So the part that really grew the gold rush is sort of like here and here. So it's not in the sketch, but then there wasn't anything there. So why would he have drawn anything there? But that's what we're going to see in just a minute, is we're going to see how it grew in the next few years. Beginning in 1848, Los Angeles was a brief stopover for the vast number of migrants on the southern road headed for the California gold country. Previously, the city's small number of general stores were centered in 2 blocks south of the plaza. New stores and services such as blacksmiths, general stores, and wagon builders were located in buildings in response to the increased flow of customers. And then beginning in the fall of 1848, when the last of the U.S. Army troops were withdrawn, these were leftovers from the U.S.-Mexico War, the character of Los Angeles' public life changed completely, from military regimentation to boomtown chaos in 6 months. The number of alcohol vendors and gambling sites in town multiplied as the northbound migrants in the late 1840s and early 1850s not only increased the sales of merchandise and services, but also the demand for horses, mules, and particularly beef cattle. If he was part of a wagon train that stopped in Los Angeles for supplies seeing this may have given Robert Owens the initial inspiration for his stables and his business as a cattle dealer. Robert Owens' grandson's biography states that he arrived in California in 1850, but it doesn't mention the gold rush. If Owens did continue north with the wagon company, they may have taken the same route as the Los Angeles residents who had traveled to the region known as the Southern Mines, in the mountains southeast of Sacramento. These early prospectors included Antonio Corral, who in 1848 had followed the first wave of miners from Sonora and other Mexican mining towns. Corral and other Californios staked claims to the camp that they named Sonora. But Corral and his companions had returned to Los Angeles in the mid-1849 after having been threatened with violence by arriving Euro American prospectors who forced them off a number of the sites the Californios were profitably working. Both as part of a wagon train and in a mining community, Owens would have relied on what Douglas Henry Daniels describes as travel craft, the skills, attitude, and outlook of African Americans who traveled to the West Coast and became members of the developing communities there. Their strategies included using networks to acquire and sort information, watching for opportunities and detecting threats, and cultivating relationships with influential persons. And in these circumstances, Robert Owens drew upon his previous experiences in the deep South borderlands and in his interactions there with white migrants seeking new opportunities, seeing them from an enslaved person's perspective of the trustworthy, the unstable, and the desperate. In this part of the gold country, Owens may have heard of other black persons working nearby, Free black persons sometimes created mining partnerships or mutual aid associations, either among themselves or with reliable white miners in what one author has described as an umbrella protection against hostile whites, in a setting of frequent lawlessness. If Owens worked in this area and accompanied other miners to the supply center of Stockton, he may have met black farmers and vaqueros in the town, which was California's fourth largest black community in the 1850s. In 1852, there was an African Methodist Episcopal Church that was established there, and a black congregation had founded a Second Baptist Church by 1854. Using such information nodes to pass along which white migrants threatened black miners with violence, who were trustworthy allies, and where they'd be able to find lodging and other assistance was an aspect of the travel craft and created an important black communication network in an unstable borderland of the gold country. Borderland number 3. It may have been through such a network that Owens first heard the discriminatory California legislation going into effect, including the 1850 Act concerning crimes and punishment that prohibited black, mulatto, and Native Americans from giving testimony for or against a white person, which was subsequently called the Testimony Law or Black Testimony Law, and the 1852 State Fugitive Slave Act that prevented enslaved persons from being able to claim their freedom once they were in California. This latter act not only confirmed the enforcement in California of the federal 1850 Fugitive Slave Law, it also upheld the constitutional rights of slaveholders who had brought their enslaved workers to California prior to statehood. In addition, it allowed slaveholders to keep their enslaved property in the state indefinitely, and to apprehend any runaway as a fugitive, put them back to work, or transport them to the South. California lawsuits in this period protesting the arrest of black persons, some of them free persons, to transport them to the slave states were usually ruled in the favor of the slaveholder. Although Robert Owens' immediate goal was the earning of the money to free his family, he was also envisioning where his family would live, how they would subsist, and what resources they would need. If he did travel to the gold country in the early 1850s, Owens may have seen the instant cities of San Francisco, Sacramento, and Stockton, and the extreme transience of large numbers of migrants housed in tents, eating in unsanitary restaurants and boarding facilities, and the paucity of medical care. Despite the high profits the merchants and vendors of critical services could obtain there, these communities' instability and the absence of other families were liabilities. Yes, the map is upside down. I did that to make it better line up with the illustration's perspective. So you have the Plaza Church here, you have the Plaza Church there, so you kind of see a little bit. And if you look carefully, you see that the illustration's kind of out of proportion. So, established more than 60 years earlier, Los Angeles may also have been more attractive because it retained more of its Mexican California character than newer cities. And it offered more acceptance of newcomers' race and phenotype than contemporary US expectations toward black persons. So whether he arrived in Texas from Arkansas or California, Owens endangered his own liberty by traveling there to bring his family to freedom. As noted before, free blacks were prohibited by law from entering Texas, and he was liable to be apprehended and sold into slavery again. He might have taken the same measures to prevent his real enslavement when he entered Texas as did others, such as formerly enslaved Nelson Ray, who retained an attorney to document his emancipation as protection against Missouri's slave colds and slave hunters when Ray returned from California to buy the freedom of his family in 1854. No details about Owens' travel to Texas or his family's 1853 journey to Los Angeles has been identified. Arriving in Los Angeles, Robert Owens developed strategies to establish himself in a community in which the attitudes of an increasing number of settlers from the U.S. South were hardening the region's perceived previous racial fluidity towards a U.S.-based Southern definition of black. The 1850 U.S. Census was taken in the midst of the gold rush migration, and it counted only 12 black persons in the city, some of whom appeared to have been enslaved servants. However, it undercounted the population in general, and an 1852 state census enumerated 34 black or mulatto persons in LA. One of the most prominent of the city's black residents when Owens arrived was the formerly enslaved Peter Biggs, who was noted for his sometimes provocative actions as a means to attract customers to his businesses. Lynn Hudson's biography on Mammy Pleasant, San Francisco, And Seth Maliwas's work on Nathan Harrison at Palomar Mountain in San Diego County were both contemporaries of Robert Owens. Examine how they use strategies of self-representation in response to racial and social constraints. Peter Biggs, for example, may have positioned himself as a jack of all trades with an element of incompetence or questionable morality as a strategy that provided him agency, adaptability, and also a means of escape from those wielding power or constraints. For instance, after he was brought to California in the US-Mexico War as an enslaved servant of US Army Captain A.J. Smith, Biggs was found to be an accomplice in an 1847 burglary in the officers' quarters, yet Biggs evaded punishment. And after the discharge of his unit, Smith left Los Angeles for the goldfields without Biggs, and subsequently Biggs established a barbering business next door to the Bella Union Hotel. And he also provided various personal services for his customers, quite a few of whom were white Southern men. Although Biggs is mentioned in the memoirs of white settlers as a somewhat foolish slave and referred to as near Pete, his actions operated on different registers in different social situations, in different social strata. Soon after gaining his freedom, Biggs married a woman named Refugio and started a family, and he held a position of respect in the Los Angeles Mexican-California community. So in Los Angeles, Robert Owens was known as Uncle Bob, and his strategy for self-representation may have responded to Peter Biggs's. It's possible that the nickname for Robert Owens was a reference to Harriet Beecher Stowe's character of Uncle Tom that community gave to Owens from her book that was published in 1852. But I suggest it was self-constructed, in contrast to Biggs' portrayal of a formerly enslaved individual from the US South. Owens drew on the Southern tradition of referring to a well-regarded older member of the community as Uncle. This persona he conveyed the image of a man who was accomplished, benevolent, and trustworthy. Although that term was used in both white and black communities in the US South in the 19th century, there, it enabled a white person to acknowledge a black person's respected position in the community, while simultaneously situating him in a social status inferior to his own. Similar to Peter Biggs, Owens' social position also operated at different registers in different sectors of the LA community. Here, Owens utilized his previous experiences of borderland settings and of migrants from the US South to skillfully convert the social pigeonhole of Uncle Bob into an expression of his relationship to the multiracial Los Angeles community. We don't know where the Owens family lived after their arrival in late 1853. At the end of 1854, 48-year-old Robert Owen made his first real estate purchase for a property at First Street's intersection with San Pedro for $1,750. At that time, First Street was the southern border of the city's central area of shops, services, and saloons frequented by migrants. Land below First Street on the east side of Main Street, where Owens' purchase was located, was occupied by vineyards. On the San Pedro Street property, Owens established both his residence and the stable, which became the basis of his family's financial security and his business success. With the purchase taking place 1 year after Owens probably paid about $2,000 for his family's freedom, in 1854, Owens likely had little financial capital for the $1,750 purchase price of this land. His grandson's biographical statement states that he visited his friend Rowan the baker, who was James Rowan of the American Bakery and the father of future Mayor Thomas Rowan, to ask for a loan to buy the land, with Owens' note as collateral. The grandson reports that Rowan declined this, saying, "Bob, if your word is no good, your note is worth less." And Rowan provided Owens with the loan of $1,500 based on their verbal agreement. This exchange between them is a snapshot of Robert Owens' social capital in Los Angeles in the mid-1850s. So during this decade, Los Angeles grew from 1,610 people to 4,385. It was accompanied by an increasing building construction and establishment of trades and industries, some of which required the purchase, housing, and maintenance of draft animals. And they contributed to the growth and support of businesses such as bathsmiths, harness makers, and feed suppliers. Robert Owens' son Charles, who was 22 in 1854, probably assisted him with the construction and organization needed to establish a stable and cattle buying business. The date that Owens began his own business in horses and cattle has not been identified, but the buying and selling of cattle was booming through 1852. However, in 1853, the state's gold output peaked and then began to decline as placer mining had exhausted most of the gold deposits in the stream and riverbeds. As a stable owner, Owens served as an important node in the information network between Black communities in California. Community organizations statewide began developing petitions for the repeal of the Black testimony law soon after its 1852 passage, with political, intellectual, and cultural centers developing in San Francisco and Sacramento. By 1855, the stability of Black churches and favorable economic conditions encouraged greater activism in these cities. Repealing the testimony law was the leading issue of the first state convention of colored citizens of California in Sacramento that year. Owens' information network likely referred on getting word about other communities from the Black drivers and teamsters who came to his stable, either on the business of buying feed, obtaining repair services, acquiring replacements for horses or mules in their wagon team that had given out, or who stopped by specifically to exchange information with Owens. Robert Owens probably is best known for, oh, I skipped a page again, sorry. Okay, it's almost that work. That was what I meant to show you before. Those are the, I will take a moment just to say. So here is, okay, first let's look at this illustration, which is 1871, and you will see that Los Angeles Street has not yet been opened. So this photograph on the left, this is actually Robert Owens' residence. It's right here. It's not this. This is a barn which appears to be gone. So this is a photograph from 1869. This is that side of San Pedro right there. It's right there. So I think the house is actually that one right there. And then when you're looking here at this tract map, you can see Los Angeles has been opened by that point, which it hasn't here. So sometimes it's hard to match up what you're looking at. So this was that curve, this is that curve, and this right here is that right there. So this was Owens' original purchase was over here. And as I'll tell you a little bit more in a second, he began purchasing land continuing west, or actually northwest, until he reached Main Street. So one thing that, here we see again the maps, which is, here's that curve again, right? Here's Los Angeles Street as it was open. Here are Robert Owens' properties, right? Here's the curve, and here is the Los Angeles Horse Market. So it would appear that Robert Owens' business encouraged the clustering of other businesses, because all through here you can find wagon makers, horseshoers, and all kinds of other horse-related industries and businesses. So Robert Owens is probably best known for his crucial intervention in preventing Biddy Mason and the other persons enslaved by Robert Smith from being transported to from the free state of California to the slave state of Texas in December 1855. This is just 2 years after Robert Owens arrived. Through his information networks, Owens probably knew that Smith's family and the 13 enslaved members of his household fleeing the Latter-day Saints community in San Bernardino were already on their way to Los Angeles, well before they arrived. He may also have heard that Elizabeth Lizzie Flake, an enslaved member of the same 1851 Morgan wagon train as Smith on their journey from Salt Lake City to San Bernardino, had notified the San Bernardino and Los Angeles sheriffs of Smith's intention to take the unfree members of his household to Texas. Yet although the state fugitive law had expired only months before, the Black testimony law was still in effect, and it prohibited an African American from claiming that a white person was violating the rights of unfree persons in his household. Was it these messages that initiated a writ of habeas corpus to be served on Robert Smith? Or was it Robert Owens who made the petition for it? When he learned of Smith's intention, perhaps from Teamster Charles Rowan or another team's driver, Owens made a decision to get involved and to use his good reputation in the community and his influential contacts, which included his neighbor, Stephen Foster, who was serving as Los Angeles' mayor, and Sheriff David Alexander, who was one of Phineas Banning's business partners. Dolores Hayden suggested that Owens may have been motivated by his son Charles's romantic interest in Biddy Mason's daughter Ellen, as another Los Angeles resident, Manuel Pepper's interest in Hannah's daughter Anne. Owens' decision might also take into consideration the risk in terms of encouraging reports from the first Convention of Colored Citizens of California, which had been held the previous month in Sacramento, and its efforts to repeal the black testimony law. Further, Robert and Charles Owens asserted the legitimacy of the black community when they, and the men whom they employed as vaqueros, who were likely persons of color, accompanied the sheriff to the Santa Monica Canyon to the campsite to surprise Robert Smith and to serve the writ on a white person. Their inclusion points to the reputation that Owens had built up in Los Angeles, derived from the enacted persona of Uncle Bob and the trustworthiness of his business interactions. It was these achievements that enabled Robert Owens to effectively intercede for Biddy Mason, Hannah, and their children. When Biddy, Hannah, and their children were declared free forever in January of 1856, Robert and Winnie Owens invited Biddy and her 3 children to share their household. Hannah and their children returned to San Bernardino, where they were reunited with her husband, Toby Embers. Owens' son, Charles, and Biddy's daughter, Ellen, were married later that year, and existing records do not state when Biddy and her family moved to their own rented house near the Owenses. However, Biddy, Charles, and Ellen, and their 1-year-old son had moved by the time the 1860 census was taken. Yet Biddy was likely to still be living with the Owens family through 1856, and she would observe the process of Robert Owens' purchasing a parcel of land adjacent to David Alexander, and this parcel appears to border land Owens already owned on the east side of the block. The following year, Owens extended his property further west on Main Street, purchasing a parcel that bordered on the land owned by Dr. Griffin. So whether Owens had made Griffin's acquaintance at the time of his 1857 land purchase, or if they had had business interactions prior, either at Griffin's drugstore or if Griffin utilized Owens' stable, it's likely that it was Robert Owens who introduced Biddy Mason to Dr. Griffin and recommended her nursing and midwifery skills. Griffin hired Biddy Mason, and they may have worked together throughout Griffin's practice into the 1870s, enabling her to achieve financial stability and a notable reputation in the community, as well as the opportunity to observe Griffin's extensive real estate purchases and large-scale land development in the years that followed. Most of the accounts of Robert Owens attribute a major part of his financial success to obtaining government contracts in Los Angeles during the Civil War. In the 1850s and 1860s, Los Angeles, such government contracts were likely to provide supplies and services to the U.S. Army, and they were granted and administered through the Quartermaster Department. However, Robert Owens is not mentioned in this period's U.S. Army records of the National Archives. Of all the documentary absences related to Owens, this one is perhaps the most intriguing. It suggests that, I mean, seriously, the Army keeps track of everything in triplicate, right? Yeah. I searched those archives. Other researchers have searched those archives. I hired an additional researcher who's really, really familiar with Army records to search the archives. There's no Robert Owens. And yet almost everything you read says he made his money through government contracts. Huh. So how could this be? Well, I believe it's because of his, it's indirect evidence of his long-term relationship, business relationship with Phineas Manning, who did hold government contracts for transportation beginning in 1854, and he was appointed as the acting quartermaster for the U.S. Army as a civilian in Southern California between 1861 and 1865. This relationship is consistent with Owens' grandson listing Phineas Manning as one of Robert Owens' most intimate friends, and it provides an important insight into Owens' social capital in Los Angeles. Sorry, I must have put this out of order, I beg your pardon. Manning had arrived in Los Angeles in 1851, and after working for a year with the Douglas and Sanford Forwarding and Commission firm, he and a partner bought the firm in 1853 and rapidly expanded it, purchasing additional wagons and 75 mules. Manning's early business ventures in transportation, forwarding, and hauling were concurrent with the U.S. Army's construction at Fort Tejon, at what is now called the Grapevine Pass on the road to the greater Los Angeles area at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. Winning the Army contracts in 1854 to transport military supplies and goods to Fort Tejon enabled Manning to grow his transportation system throughout Southern California. Manning's rapid increase in livestock and vehicles required facilities and capable personnel to maintain them, which may have initiated his business relationship with Robert Owens. Banning's base of operations was near the harbor at San Pedro, approximately 25 miles from Los Angeles, where extensive stables and wagon works and other facilities were located. And Banning's business office in Los Angeles was near the northern junction of Main and Spring Streets, 1 block north of First Street. However, his business also required stables and a service area near his stage line's terminus at the Los Angeles hotels. Although the exact location of the stables and service areas has not been identified, it may have been in the area between Main and San Pedro Streets, below 2nd Street, that by the 1880s had become the Los Angeles horse market, surrounded by livery and feed stables, blacksmiths and farrier businesses, wagon works, and carriage storage facilities. It's the area immediately southwest of Owens' San Pedro Street property. In 1858, Banning was also selected bidder for the U.S. Army's contracts to ship freight from Fort Tejon to San Pedro and to provide supplies for Fort Yuma at the Colorado River. The following year, the Army quartermasters Winfield S. Hancock arrived in Los Angeles to establish a quartermaster depot to support various operations in Southern California and the Arizona Territory. There's no direct record of Robert Owens' interaction with Hancock, but Hancock is also listed in Owens' grandson's list of his intimate friends. After Hancock leased a warehouse on a corral for government animals on the west side of Main Street between 2nd and 3rd Streets, these properties were 1 block south of the Main Street, at Main Street, 1st Street, which was occupied by Phineas Banning. So Banning's property you might be able to read is right there. And then right after that, Owens buys this one. Initially by mortgage, which connected with his other properties. Remember, Los Angeles Street's not open yet. So this is one that went to his son later. So this is all Banning property in through here. His purchase and its timing points to Owens' business relationship with Banning and to the business with the U.S. Army that they were both engaged in prior to the Civil War. In 1861, Hancock departed to serve as a field quartermaster during the Civil War. Banning campaigned to be appointed the civilian quartermaster for Southern California, and he also lobbied for the Army to move its supply depot to New San Pedro, ensuring that all supplies would be landed at Banning's facilities there. So in 1862, Camp New San Pedro and Camp Drum Barracks were established, and Owens' grandson's account states that Owens was granted a government contract to supply hay at San Pedro. Government contract, right?
Drum Barracks.
Drum Barracks, right. So his grandson says that at this point, Owens gets the contract to supply hay there, or subcontract, as it probably was. So Robert Owens may have continued to provide stabling and care for government horses, which were referred to as public animals, in Los Angeles after the relocation of the quartermaster's office to San Pedro, as well as providing for livestock for Banning's transportation business. In some sources, Owens' facility is referred to as the government corral. These government contracts were likely a financial lifeline for Owens in the following years. The environmental disaster of unprecedented rain and extreme flooding from December 1861 through January 1862 was followed by over 2 years of drought throughout the state. Commerce in Los Angeles in this period declined to the extent that the city made no tax assessments in 1863 and 1864. Not only was California's cattle industry decimated as thousands of animals in the fields either drowned or subsequently starved to death, the loss of pasturage and the inability to grow animal fodder during the drought resulted in high prices to import hay and grain to feed stable horses. Here you see an ad for provide pasturage and hay, with the animals saying, you can leave them with Robert Owens. Hay for cattle and horses soon became a precious commodity as a result of the 1862-1865 drought. Due to the lack of rainfall, large quantities of it could not have been produced in Southern California, and Owens may have sourced it in the San Joaquin Valley, where dry farming of wheat and other grains began in the 1850s, and the introduction of irrigated crops such as alfalfa for animal feed began. While dry farmed grain would fail during the drought, the area's extensive water table may have sustained irrigated crops. And additionally, despite the dryness and heat of the valley floor in 1864, high grassy meadows still flourished along the streams in the upper reaches of the Kings Valley. Robert Owens was in the San Joaquin Valley when he died in August 1865 of typhoid fever, an intestinal infection caused by contaminated food or water. There is no documentation of whether Stockton had been Owens' destination or if he'd been en route for a shipment of hay when he became ill and sought aid from his contacts there. If his obituary had been printed in the Los Angeles Star, it likely would have documented what was the community's perception of Owens in that year's turning point. But the provocative pro-Confederacy stance of the newspaper editor, Henry Hamilton, had resulted in the Star being shut down the year before, 1864. Only this brief notice appeared in Los Angeles Daily News. There is no record of whether or when his remains were brought back to Los Angeles. At the time of his death, Robert Owens was considered the wealthiest member of Los Angeles' Black community. Property that he and Biddy Mason acquired continued to increase in value in subsequent years, particularly in the land boom of the 1880s, and yielded considerable wealth to the family. That members of Los Angeles' Black community were able to invest in real estate was a stark contrast to the limited opportunities that many Black communities across the U.S. faced in the post-Reconstruction backlash against government support for formerly enslaved persons slid towards the one-drop rule and the separate but equal judgments of 1893. Meanwhile, in 1913, W.E. Du Bois commented on the seemingly unlimited opportunities in Southern California, so it's quite a contrast between what was happening in the rest of the country and what was available for the Black community in Los Angeles. This is a very different trajectory, and is suggested by the 1850s increasing number of Southerners and the courts' support of the federal and state fugitive slave laws. Though Robert Owens' skill, strategies, and determination to create a safe space for his family members and others to be, he defined and defended the legitimacy of Los Angeles' Black community. As he developed personal relationships of trust through his business and personal networks, he deployed a persona that asserted his own position while using cultural tropes to avoid antagonizing those who might resent his achievements. I suggest that in addition to providing for his family and their descendants, through his example, Robert Owens made significant contributions to the foundation of these unlimited opportunities through the turn of the 20th century. This is in no way intended to cast shade on Biddy Mason's outstanding achievements and her lasting influence in Los Angeles. While I was in Washington, D.C. to work at the National Archives, I also went to the Smithsonian to search through his research records that he did for the 1988 Black Angelinos exhibit for the California African American Museum in Los Angeles. In his notes for this exhibit, curator Lonnie Bunch wrote, "My goal is not to assess greater importance to Robert Owens or to denigrate Biddy Mason. Rather, I am attempting to demonstrate that there were several fountains of strength and inspiration at work in Civil War era Los Angeles. Although Biddy Mason garnered much acclaim and notoriety before and after her death, Robert Owens deserves much greater attention than he has received from historians. While much is made of Biddy Mason's legacy of thrift, hard work, and an entrepreneurial spirit, Robert Owens' accomplishments obtained at an earlier and more difficult period have remained unnoticed." Thank you.
Questions?
Yes, questions, please. Yes, Jim.
So, obviously Robert Owens was a very brilliant man. I mean, to have made all of the changes and everything he did. Has it been considered that the contracts he had with the U.S. government may have been under another name, so the government would assume there's a white person instead of a black person to make a deal?
That's possible, although both Robert and Owens are such common names, how would the government know?
Well,
It's possible.
in order to make the deal.
It's possible.
Or just under the umbrella of Banning. I mean, Banning was his next door neighbor.
Right.
Banning was so anti-slavery, he was so pro-union.
You know, I wondered about that though, about how, because the Banning family actually had owned slaves back in Maryland.
I mean, and
So, in Delaware, I'm sorry. So what I wondered though is like, well, that was how his bread was buttered.
the timing is perfect.
I don't know, I would like to think that he was a dyed-in-the-wool supporter of the Union and an abolitionist, but I also have to look at that.
Banning was defending everybody against the El Monte boys
Right.
for 10 years.
Right.
And it would be logical that he would be helping on this.
Yeah.
Question about how the hell he could raise so much money as a slave. Could he have been a harness maker, a blacksmith, a horseshoer, a horse breaker? I mean, obviously going into the stable business, he had to have had some talents in it.
You mean in Arkansas? Do you mean in Arkansas?
Yes.
How would he have done that when there was wealth of enslaved labor, there wouldn't have been that much of a market for.
No, but what I'm saying is a lot of slaves did have these talents, these
They
specialties.
did, they did.
And.
And they could work a little on the side, but as the research shows, you get like 50 cents a
Sure.
day.
Is there any
So coming up with
indication
$3,000 at 50 cents a day would have been
Yeah,
tremendous.
is there any indication that he was a harness maker, a blacksmith, et cetera?
But actually, there's not.
That he had all these skills?
There is not any information about how he might have been trained while he was enslaved. Isaiah, I saw first, and then.
So I read the Robert Curry Owens biography or autobiography, UCLA Special Collections, Beard Mathis. But I know he states that when Robert Owens died, that he was up there visiting a brother in Stockton.
That's in a different document, isn't it? That's not in the, I don't think that's in the autobiographical 4-pager. I think that's in a different document.
That might be the one
Yeah.
where it's my grandfather, that legacy. So do you
Yeah,
think when he
about the half-brother.
Yeah. do
There's
you think
exactly
that's
one
from his
reference that I
grandfather?
found in somebody else's research, but I have not seen any primary sources on it, so I can't copy on it, I can't comment on it. But supposedly the half-brother was in Stockton.
Okay, cause that's what I was wondering when you brought up that when he died up there and why he could have possibly been visiting, and then his question where he talked about the horse breaking or how he couldn't have raised that much money. I hadn't thought of that, but when you put it like that, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. So I wonder if those connections might have got him like ingratiated when he first got there.
I think you're talking about possible horse breaking in California.
No, just like those connections that
Okay.
he met once he left Arkansas or Texas. Do you think those connections are how he got his start?
It could be, or it could be when he was on the trail, the overland trail, because he would have had to pick up any skills that was needed for the company to survive. So one or the other.
Makes sense, makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in that, the relationship of Dr. Griffith to Biddy Mason. And I might be mistaken, but I'm remembering that Dr. Griffith was very much pro-South.
He was.
And so I know that Biddy Mason was, at least I had heard in the research that I've done, she was a wonderful midwife. And so I mean, that might have been part of why he supported her. But can you, can you elaborate a little bit on this relationship between Griffith and Biddy Mason? And was Griffith friendly with Owens too?
Yes, Griffin did work with Robert Owens. I imagine he kept his horse at Owens' stable since right next door. But we just don't have documentary evidence. So all of this is like circumstantial, like he must have because he lived next door. I read a lot of Griffin documents, and there's no mention of Biddy by name. You know, he may refer to a nurse, but he doesn't call her Biddy. And I see no references to Robert Owens by name. But we want to infer that Griffin, you know, and it's probably a very complicated relationship. I mean, he came to California with his own body servant, who lived with him for a while in Los Angeles until he went to the gold fields himself. So, it's complicated. You know, it's really hard for me to say that because he was pro-Southern, does that mean he was in some way discriminatory towards people of color? It can't be told from the record.
Yeah, there's, I mean, and the judge in the case, was it Benjamin Hayes?
It was Benjamin Hayes.
Yeah, okay.
Who himself was a Southerner.
He was himself a Southerner, and his family had enslaved him. I want to say one more thing about Dr. Griffin was I found some letters he exchanged with his brother when his brother was in the army and Griffin was just coming up. And apparently the family had enslaved brothers. He had one, his brother had the other, and they exchanged. They said, you know, Alan wants to tell his brother this. So, I mean, the relationship was such that they realized that these are human beings, these are people. And so they really supported that friendship, you know, that the relationship between the brothers, and transported messages between them, told each other how they were. So, I mean, even though the brothers either didn't have the ability to write, or perhaps they wouldn't have been permitted to send letters between each other, Griffin and his older brother made sure they stayed in touch. I'm going to read first.
Well, when you talk of banning, you also start seeing the connection with Benjamin Davis, Wilson, Workman, Temple, and some other early movers and shakers. So if Owens was in good with banning, he very well could have had other business connections with other movers.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's, like I say, there's no documentation to support it, but business is business.
And his business went very well, so he certainly did have his supporters, even though we might not have a list of who they are. By the way, I did find Owens listed in one of Banning's ledgers. So he clearly had a business relationship with Banning, but the ledger doesn't say what it was for. It's just carrying a balance forward. So I tied them together in the documentary record, but I can't say a lot about it because I just don't have a textual record for it. Isaiah.
What record did you use to track him following the first of his children, where you were able to be like, he was in Arkansas when she was born and those kind of things?
The census?
Like slave schedule census?
No, the regular census in LA in 1860s and 1870s, you can see where children were born, and you can, from their ages, you can deduce the years.
And that's how you, did you use the census to see what state he was in as well, like during those years?
So the only record we have is the census. Okay, here's another thing about Robert Owens, is he might not have been called Robert Owens,
Yep.
right? So it'd be very challenging to be able to even use slave schedules to find him prior to his arrival in Los Angeles in 1853.
Yeah, so I read into that, I'm like, how do I figure this out? But
Yeah,
that's-
so I'm going by the births of the children in later censuses. I mean, if Charles says, I was born in this state in this year,
Yeah.
I tend to believe it until I have better data. Yes?
Can you back up a couple slides to where you have that cattle? Now, you know that picture that has a connection to our corral?
Does it?
Oh,
Yeah, that's Charles Russell's first drawing of the, it's called Waiting for a Chinook in Montana.
And, yeah, that's
Yeah,
from High
like,
Plains,
I-
California.
Anyway, that old Joe, that steer, was Russell's symbol.
How cool.
So you have a nice tie-in with our roots.
Actually, I wish it was intentional. Was there another question over here? No? Is that it? All right. Oh, one more, yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Owens was literate, obviously.
Yes.
Do you have any idea of how he picked up his literacy?
No. There's like nothing before we get to 1853. Everything before that I have to infer from records, and I haven't done anything that stated that. So, all right, well, thank you very much.
So, I want to say, we want to thank Laura for speaking to us, and as a little reward and a memento, we have this plaque that we give her. Okay, so next month, you'll be getting an announcement for the rendezvous, and maybe we'll have it, we'll have a large turnout, so looking forward to that. So see you then, and thank you very much.